morning. It's Sunday, December 13. In these weeks leading up to Christmas, we are looking at the family tree of Jesus, particularly four individuals. I'm calling them the fathers of Jesus. Four individuals in the Old Testament, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and David, who show us something about what it means for us still today to live with hope, peace, joy, and love, all of the blessings of Christmas. They're part of our family tree as well. We may not realize that, but spiritually speaking, their story is part of our story, especially as they anticipate the future coming and work of Jesus Christ. We live after Christmas, after the full work of Christ has been accomplished on the cross, and yet these individuals show us clearly what it means for us to have a life anchored in the work of God done for us in Jesus Christ. And so today we're looking at Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, the son of Isaac. Fascinating character. And if you know anything about the story of Jacob, you know that he was a schemer, a deceiver, a trickster. In fact, even the name Jacob is something that suggests his personality. If you know anything about the way he and his twin brother Esau were born, you know that there was a struggle even before they were born, each of them struggling to be the first one who would be born. Esau is the firstborn, but as he's born, Jacob is grabbing on to Esau's heel, almost as if he's trying to pull him back so he could be the firstborn. And Jacob literally means grasper of the heel. It's a figure of speech that suggests a person who is a bit of a shyster, a schemer, one who can't be trusted because of his deceitful tendencies. And Jacob certainly lived up to that reputation, especially if you know the story, how he tricked his old and blind father Isaac into getting the blessing. Isaac was getting old and wanted to give blessings to his two sons, beginning, of course, with the firstborn blessing that would go to Esau. Jacob tricked his father Isaac with the help of his mother Rebekah. He put some goat skins on his arms so that he would have the feel of hairiness on his arms that his blind father Isaac wouldn't be able to tell whether that was really Jacob or Esau or not. So Jacob tricks his father into believing that he, in fact, is Esau and gets the blessing of the firstborn. This outrages Esau, understandably so, when he hears about it. He's intent on killing Jacob, his brother, because he has stolen first his birthright and now the blessing. And so Jacob has to run for his life. He's convinced his brother Esau is going to kill him, and so he lives for many years, far from home. He actually does very well there. He prospers. He becomes a fairly wealthy individual. But he decides at some point that it's time to return home. And it's actually when he's planning to return home that he receives word that his brother Esau is meeting him. He's advancing with 400 men, presumably a small army. Jacob can safely assume that Esau has a gathering, a group of people with him to pursue, capture, perhaps even kill Jacob. So he devises a plan. He divides all of his property, his family members, all of his herds and flocks into two camps, thinking that even if Esau captures one of those, the other one will escape. He sends his family, all of his possessions ahead of him, and he's left alone. The night before he knows he is going to meet Esau, he's alone, he's afraid. And it's there that we read this fascinating story recorded in Genesis 32. Let me read verses 22 to 32 with you. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans, and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel. saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose up above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. It's a fascinating story, one that invites us to ask obvious questions like, who is this man that wrestles Jacob all night long? And what's the purpose of this hours-long wrestling match? The passage indicates that Jacob was wrestling with a man, but Jacob knew that it wasn't just a man. He says, in fact, after the fact, that it was God. He saw the face of God in the figure of that adversary. So Jacob knew that this was no ordinary opponent that he was up against here. It's why he wouldn't let this wrestling combatant go until he blessed him. You know, it suggests that all his life, Jacob was a fighter. He struggled, he schemed, he fought to get the blessing of his father Isaac. And now it seems as if he's in the fight of his life to get the blessing not from his father, but from God, his heavenly Father. And he's alone with God, struggling as never before to obtain God's blessing. You know, this passage has frequently been used to illustrate how we all experience something about what it likes for us to struggle with God, to fight with God to some extent. Sometimes it seems as if God is not on our side. It's as if God isn't there when we need him. He's not so much with us as he is against us. Now, people think that way sometimes, and I'm sure we've had thoughts that run along those lines, especially when we're hurting, when something has happened in our lives that is very upsetting, very unpredictable, something that is impossible for us to manage and understand. It's then that we wonder how God fits into all of that, especially because it doesn't seem as if God is helping us. He's not intervening. God didn't stop the accident, or prevent the disease, or bring the cure, or save the marriage. All of these experiences can lead us to think that God is against us and that we somehow struggle with God in order to obtain a blessing. We question his promises and we doubt his love. And sometimes this can bring about a prolonged season of discouragement, spiritual dryness. It's as if we're in a wasteland. We can even have what might be called a crisis of faith, or what many have called a dark night of the soul, a prolonged season of doubt and struggle. We can ask the question, which is actually the title of one of Philip Yancey's books, where is God when it hurts? Or Disappointment with God, another title of a book he wrote. We resonate with those titles because we hurt and we wonder where God is in all of that, and we sometimes experience disappointment with God because he's not living up to his promises. And so this is a struggle ultimately with God. Now, it's true that we all experience what it means to struggle with God, or to have a sense that God is somehow even against us at times. But is this all that this strange story of Jacob's wrestling with God is about? Is it just a picture of everyone's spiritual struggles? If that's all this story is about, then frankly, Jacob is in deep trouble. In fact, we are all in deep trouble. Because Jacob, it appears, has finally met his match here. He's gotten himself into a situation that even he, with all of his scheming and conniving, is unable to get out of. He's come up against someone he can't overpower. Now, it might sound strange for me to say it that way, because the text seems to suggest that it was Jacob, that the wrestling opponent, the angel, God, that Jacob was the one that God couldn't overcome. That he, in fact, came out of this wrestling match as the victor. Well, it does look like Jacob proves himself to be a good wrestler here. All night long, they fight. hour after hour in the darkness. This was no easy match for either of them. And when daybreak finally comes, Jacob's adversary finally discovers that he cannot overpower Jacob. So Jacob wins, right? Well, at the very least, this hours-long wrestling match seems to end up in a draw. No worse than that. Seems like Jacob wins. It's no worse than a tie. Jacob manages to fight his way out of this epic battle. And so we think. But there's more going on here. And to help us understand that, I want you to notice the very pivotal moment in this struggle. Hours after it began, shortly before it ends. It's there in verse 25. When the man said that he could not overpower Jacob, what does he do? He touches the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Now that's very important. The man touched Jacob's hip. That's all he did. He just touched it. He didn't smack Jacob. He didn't body slam Jacob. Think of the kind of wrestling matches we see on TV these days. They're so ridiculous, so predictable, so fake. It's not uncommon for one of the wrestlers to climb up on the ropes around the rings and stand up at one of the corners, stand up there and look out over the crowd. He's brash, he's confident, everybody knows what's going to happen. He's going to jump high in the air and land with all his weight on the other wrestler who's lying down helplessly on the mat. The crowd loves moments like these because the match is about to end. Someone is about to win. And the guy writhing in agony on the floor, as this often goes, miraculously finds the strength to roll out of the way, subdue his opponent, and secure victory from the jaws of defeat. We see this played out time and time again in these TV wrestling matches. But you get the point. In boxing or in wrestling, there's almost always a deciding blow. There's a finishing punch, a crushing assault that ends it. But that's not what we see here in Genesis 32. All the man that Jacob has been wrestling against all night has to do is touch Jacob's hip. Robert Alter is a renowned biblical scholar, one whose translation and understanding of Hebrew verbs and the verses of Scripture really sheds a great deal of light on the original meaning of these verses. And he indicates in a commentary on the book of Genesis that some translations suggest that this man that Jacob has been wrestling against strikes Jacob, strikes him at the hip. He says that's unwarranted because the Hebrew verb in this particular form always means touch, even barely touch, he goes on to say. Now that's very important. Why? Because it indicates the real power that Jacob's adversary actually possessed. All he had to do is touch Jacob's hip, to wrench it out of joint, and to render him for the rest of his life as a man who would walk with a limp. All he had to do was touch. This means that all night long, Jacob's adversary has been holding back, almost toying with Jacob, similar to the way a cat plays with a mouse before killing it. And Jacob suddenly realizes this as morning light slowly begins to break through the darkness. It's only then that he insists that this man give him a blessing before he lets him go. He knows that the damage inflicted upon him just by that one touch suggests that Jacob was fighting against no mere mortal, but actually the power and presence of God. Jacob knows he's fighting against a power that not even he can defeat. Someone who could actually destroy him. He knew that. But someone who mercifully chose not to. As he calls that place Peniel, the face of God, he does so recognizing, as the text says, that God spared him. Even though he saw his face, he allowed him to live. Now, this is what this story is really all about. It's about a God who restrains himself in the fight against Jacob. He holds back. He condescends. Why? Because he wants to bless Jacob and not destroy Jacob. He doesn't want to kill him. He wants to make him thrive. He really is on Jacob's side, in other words. He could destroy him, but he wants to bless him. But in order for this to happen, Jacob needs to first acknowledge the truth about who he really is. He has come to understand the truth about his adversary, recognizing that it's no mere mortal, that it is in fact God that he's struggling against. But now he has to know himself. He needs to confess the truth not only about God, but who he is. The man asks him, "What is your name?" Years before, Father Isaac, old blind Isaac, asked him that same name or question, "What is your name?" And Jacob the schemer said, "I am Esau, your firstborn." Notice again that when that question is asked here, Jacob finally has to admit the truth. He's met his match. He's in the hands of God, the one who cannot be deceived. I'm Jacob. I'm the liar, the schemer, the deceiver. He gives his real name to the one he knows he cannot deceive. Do you see what's happening here? Jacob knows that he is in the fight of his life, literally speaking. He's in the hands of God, someone even far more formidable than Esau, whom he is about to meet. And he tells the truth. He owns up to his reputation. He admits all the lies and the schemes. He's a broken man now. He's defeated, irreparably wounded. But then, at his weakest moment, not his strongest, God blesses him. He gives him a new name, Israel. Often translated as one who struggles with God, and Jacob certainly did that. But literally, Israel means God fights. Just that. God fights. Now, we may think that God fights against us sometimes, that God is not on our side, that he's our adversary, but it's not true. As the New Testament, especially in Romans 8, so confidently asserts, God is for us, always for us, never against us. And we see it clearly, most clearly, in the work of Jesus Christ, which is actually what this strange story in Genesis 32 is finally all about. The God that Jacob wrestled against chose to be weak. He restrained himself. He became small. He held back. And it's exactly what we see in the incarnation of Jesus Christ, which is what we celebrate at this time of year at Christmas. God choosing to be weak, deciding to be small, coming to us as one who could destroy us, but who in his mercy spares us. The struggle that Jacob endured is nothing like the struggle Jesus endured. He was crushed. He was defeated by the weight of God's judgment. The punishment and the death that we deserved were put on him, and he freely took it. So we wouldn't have to. You know, when you look at the cross, you see the ultimate meaning and purpose of Israel. God fights. You see how there, in the person of Jesus Christ, God fights for us. He is never against us. Sometimes it may seem like that, but no, he is always on our side, wanting to bless us and not to hurt us. I love the words of John Calvin in his commentary on Genesis 32. He says this, "God supplies us with more strength to resist than he employs in opposing us." I love that line. God fights against us with his left hand, but he is always fighting for us with his right hand. It's because God fights for us that the blessing we crave is finally given. That's what Genesis 32 is really all about. The blessing of God is not based on our struggle, but the struggle that Jesus endured for us. We don't have to earn it. We need simply to admit the truth about who we really are and then gratefully receive the blessing, the gift of grace, given by one who should and could certainly kill us, but mercifully chooses not to. Even with a limp, Jacob could go forward in his weakness, celebrating the strength of God, the strength of knowing that he is a blessed child of God. I hope you know that strength and that blessing in spite of all of the weaknesses that we endure. If you know the power of that blessing, you know that just as this story ends in Genesis 32, we walk forward out of the darkness into light, with a new day dawning. The light and the day that indicates the power and the blessing of God, the gifts of God that shine upon us, that are ours not because we've earned them, but because God has graciously given them. Thanks so much for watching. I hope it's been a message that has encouraged you, and I look forward to sharing more with you next week as we look at the example of David, again, seeing how God fights for us. Be well and be blessed.